Good morning, everyone. Glad you're here. Hello over there. Good morning, everyone, and we're glad to have Darrell with us today, who is stateside because she's been on a mission trip. But we may all move to Jamaica and join you. How much room do you have on your farm? Yeah. Well, it's a beautiful day, which is probably why some people aren't here. Allison and I were having a conversation yesterday about, okay, was that the last of winter, or is there more to come? You think that's it?
It isn't. No, it isn't Easter yet.
Okay.
We've had freezes.
We've had freezes later than this. Yep. So, Dwight, I thought of you on last Sunday. After I left here, I went to church for most of it, had to leave a little bit early to go catch a flight out of Love Field to D.C. And sitting next to me were a man and a woman who were married, who were from Northern California, and he's a postal worker, and he's like a union rep within the Postal Service. And he was on his way. They together were on their way for a big protest that happened last Monday. D.C., it was flooded with postal workers who were there protesting privatization. And then they were lobbying the next 2 days. And had a lovely conversation with this couple. And it made me think about you in particular. our favorite former postal carrier. Very good. Well, I was in D.C. this week, and then I was in Kansas City, and I'm home for a couple weeks now before some more travel kicks up. I mentioned to you last week that I was going to an event, and George was actually there as well, and Nancy Caston representing Faith Commons. And a funny little thing that happened is the conference was Tuesday and Wednesday at the National Press Club, which is like 2 or 3 blocks from the White House. And when the thing ended at 3 o'clock-ish on Wednesday, a bunch of us together went over like 2 blocks from there to the Hotel Washington, which has a rooftop bar overlooking the White House and the Ellipse. Like, it was amazing. Like, it is, if you know that area of D.C., the Hotel Washington is across the street from the Treasury. So it's this beautiful view, and it was sunset and all that. And one of our friends who was staying in that hotel, I could not afford to stay in that hotel, but others were. I was staying in more affordable accommodations, 2 train stops away. Anyhow, one of our friends stayed a few days longer, and it turns out that is the very hotel where Zelensky and the Ukrainian delegation were staying before they went to the White House. And she posted on Facebook that she watched them leave the hotel and come back to the hotel on Friday. Like, just happened to be there to see all this. And I thought, oh my goodness, what a crazy place this is, and how close. The closing speaker at our conference was Pete Buttigieg, the former transportation secretary. And y'all, he's seriously short. I had never seen him in person.
Oh, really?
Like, he's a tiny little man. Yeah. Very nice, very, very, very well spoken. Going back and reviewing, I wrote a story about it. His content is great. My critique is he lacks a little charisma. I mean, he's engaging, but he's not like, going to rally the troops, unless you're looking for reason, right? We also, the day before, heard J.B. Pritzker, who is the governor of Illinois, who you may have seen on TV. That dude is charismatic. I mean, he is like, he's something else. We heard panels from a bunch of former government officials and some current representatives. Some of that was off the record, and I couldn't report on it. I tell you, the woman who impressed me the most as just being a brilliant speaker who was on a panel was, oh dear, what's her name? She's the president of the Human Rights Campaign. And just great one-liners. I posted this on Facebook, and then I quoted it in my Friday Roundup. She's the one who said, "Courage is like glitter. Once it's on you, it's on you." That's a great line. Courage is like glitter. Love that. So 2 days intensively of all this stuff and talking about democracy. And a lot of faith community people there, a lot of nonprofit leaders there. A lot of these were folks who work in sort of that intersection like we do of the nonprofit sector and the faith community. Paul Rauschenbusch, who's head of Interfaith Alliance, who's going to be, by the way, the speaker at a joint event General Assembly for CBF this summer, put on by B&G and AWAB, the Association of Welcoming and Affirming Baptists. So that would be a big event. He and his staff were there, people like that. And, this was a group of people who are do-gooders, by and large, and want to help people, and who are all, as a unit, despondent and in despair about the state of the world today. And we were all like clinging for any hope anybody might, throw us a lifeline out here. And I don't have any great revelations other than one thing. So this organization that sponsored this thing, Democracy Forward, which is really a coming and growing concern. Y'all have heard me talk about them before. It's led by a woman named Skye Perryman, who grew up in Waco and went to Baylor undergrad. Some of you who are Baylor folks will know her name from Baylor alumni. She's very active in the Baylor alumni group. And they are the organization that's been suing the Trump administration for just thing after thing after thing, and they're winning so far. So the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship that we're a part of was party to a lawsuit to stop ICE from being able to do immigration raids in churches. That lawsuit, we were there with the Quakers on this thing. A week ago Friday, a judge issued a restraining order saying you cannot the plaintiffs in this case, which is us and the Quakers and a Sikh group. Wow. It's an interesting coalition, right? The judge said you cannot send ICE agents into this. So our church is one of the churches that, by court order, is off limits to ICE right now. Yeah. Well, only the plaintiffs in the case. So you got to be a CBF church or a Quaker congregation or a Sikh group.
But can they be parked across the street?
Well, yeah, they just can't come in. They can't. Yeah, they can come. They can't. So there's another big lawsuit that has like 20 plaintiffs in it, that includes the United Methodist Church and the Lutheran Church and the Episcopal Church and a bunch of others. That's a little bit later in the process, and there's not been a ruling on that. But I mean, ultimately, we're going to win on this stuff. It's just taking time. So there's this, this rash of executive orders and all these things. And the problem is people are getting hurt in the process. So I've been meditating a lot this week on last Sunday's sermon. Now, some of y'all know I am the president of the Victoria Powers fan club. I'm way up there in fan club. And Victoria preached a wonderful sermon last Sunday. I had one beef with it that's probably more about me than about her. If you were here, the sermon was about forgiveness and the need for people like us to forgive those who hurt us. And the thing that bothered me, and she sort of said this, but I wanted her to say it louder and clearer, was we cannot forgive people who are still actively hurting other people. Because while we can forgive people as God calls us to do for what they have done, we cannot let them keep beating people up. And so this is a real problem. And then I was sort of meditating on this. No, meditating's a spiritual word. I was stewing on this yesterday or day before. And then I suddenly was reminded of the words of Jesus on the cross, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And here's Jesus praying for God to forgive the people who are in the very act of crucifying him. Well, good Lord, Jesus, how can we be like you? I can't. Because it's very hard to think about forgiving someone who is currently actively bullying and killing and starving people.
Well, and what about if they know what they do?
Well, there's the thing, and this is the illusion a lot of us have lived under because we're good people and we want to think the best of people, and they just don't know, they just don't understand. Now, y'all, this is the classic liberal failure, because people like, I won't speak about you, I'll speak about me. People like me who are card-carrying liberals believe that if we just educate people enough, if we just get them enough information, they'll see it our way. And the reality is it doesn't work that way. So here's another example of this. And this all is relevant to today's lesson, I promise. Again, every Sunday I open the text and I'm like, oh my God, how could this be any more relevant? Do y'all know who Phil Vischer is? Anyone know who Phil Vischer is? He created VeggieTales. Y'all know VeggieTales? Bob the Talking Tomato? Okay. So Phil Vischer created VeggieTales, and he now he has a podcast called the Holy Pod Podcast. Holy Pod. Yeah. And he comes, like most of us, he comes out of an evangelical tradition. And if you go watch VeggieTales, it's all Bible stories, just set with vegetables as the characters. And it's great for kids. It's really, really good. Well, he's turned out to be more like us than you would have guessed. And he's very vocal on social media. And he posted something yesterday or the day before about how the administration has now sent a notice to every religious organization that is helping and has helped for a long, long time resettle refugees in the United States. Legal, vetted refugees, y'all, not illegal aliens, people who've been invited to come to the country, who've been vetted, gone through a long, long process. The administration has now sent a notice to them saying that they're not going to help them anymore. They don't need their help. They're breaking the tie with these religious organizations, which is some of the biggest names in Christian ministry. Well, Phil Vischer pointed this out. And what's always interesting on social, particularly on Twitter, God help you if you're on the cesspool of Twitter, I have to be for work. Immediately, there's all these responses who are people not agreeing with Phil Vischer, but saying, good, the church shouldn't get any money from government. What? Okay. My point is, are you going to fund this yourself through your church? No, the answer is no. Because I'm just going to tell you from my life experience, which is significant in different sectors here, the very people who want government not to fund social services through churches will not give money to their churches. The bottom line is they don't want their money helping anyone anywhere. It's not just government, it's also church. Because these are the very people who are stingiest at church. I've been on that side of it. I know the details. I'm just going to tell you, I've talked to other pastors. This is the way it works. So this ultimately is not about government or church. It's about being stingy. So I left D.C. and I spent a brief visit in Kansas City, flew in Thursday afternoon, left Friday morning. And B&G sponsored a thing at some folks' home, some very gracious hosts in Liberty, Missouri, where Jason Edwards is pastor at Second Baptist, our former pastoral resident. And we had a dialogue with Ryan Burge, who we quote all the time, who's a social scientist, social researcher from Eastern Illinois University, and has been an American Baptist pastor. Ryan is one of the smartest people I know about religion data. And he has a Substack called Graphs About Religion that if you're into Substack, follow him. It's really, really great stuff. Several times a week, he's posting things. And he was in town to speak to the Episcopalians, which is a whole other fascinating thing because the Episcopal Church has more money than people right now. But that's another story. But the group was asking Ryan about, everyone's fascinated by the rise of the non-denominationals. So, churches that are not affiliated with any denomination, right? And if you lump these all together, they're the largest denomination in America today. Like 40% of church-going people are in non-denominational churches. This is enormous. And we've talked about this before, it's a sea change over what any of us have grown up with or known in the past. Look around Dallas. Just think about the number of non-denominational churches you see and drive by and know that it's not only the quantity, but some of the largest churches are there as well. Yes, we have some large Southern Baptist churches, Prestonwood, for example. But for every Prestonwood, there's 5 non-denominationals out there. Yes.
Park City's considered that.
Well, they're still Baptist. They're affiliated with the Baptist General Convention of Texas, just not the SBC. Right, so they still have some denominational affiliation. They're not affiliated with CBF. They were in the beginning.
Okay.
Yeah, but they've sort of... I'm going to the right, y'all, for those who can't see this. Watermark's a non-denom. Yeah. Gateway Church, non-denominational, right? So many of these all around. So here's the thing. Non-denominational churches have no accountability to anyone anywhere except the local church. And one of the people asked Ryan this question about, where does their money go? And his answer was, it largely stays right there. Whereas this is part of the appeal to non-denoms for some people today who want to have more control over their giving. So if you give to a Baptist church or a Methodist church or a Presbyterian or an Episcopal church, you are funding not only this church, but a global enterprise of support. And so particularly the Presbyterian church, even the Southern Baptist Convention, has outposts and has infrastructure all over the world. So if there's a famine in Addis Ababa, they have people on the ground there to help distribute food, and part of your offering is sustaining that. Whereas a non-denominational church, if they want to do anything about an urgent need, they've got to recreate the wheel because they have no infrastructure to do this. And yet, Ryan says the data show that it is that lack of overhead, that lack of infrastructure that makes the non-denominational church appealing, because not only is there no oversight, there's no accountability to anyone, there is no overhead out. If you put $1 in the plate at Watermark, 90 cents of that's going to stay at Watermark. And 10 cents of it might go to some local missions, right? I mean, it's just, that's the way it is. It's all going to be here, and you don't have to question that. Whereas, if you put $1 in the plate here, about 60 cents of it stays here. And the other 40 cents is going all over to different things. And so this is the difference between a denominational model and a non-denominational model. But it comes down to this issue of, okay, if you don't want government feeding hungry people through religion, are you going to fund the religion? I've heard this argument for decades. Well, just let the church do it. Well, the church doesn't have the money to do it because you're starving the church too. And by the way, the Old Testament prophets have a word about that, as does Jesus. And we'll get into that. So all of that sets the stage for where are we in Micah today? We're entering chapter 4. And yes.
Can I ask just a quick
Yes.
question into the weeds a little bit? if you
Yes.
may? At what point in time historically did the concept of sanctuary go away? Do you have any idea?
Well, I think you're better to ask at what point did it arrive?
Well, I know in the Middle Ages.
So there is a long, but it's sort of waxed and waned over time, right? And America, being as freewheeling as we are, has had less acquaintance with this idea than, say, Europe and other places. So for us, I think it really got a boost during the earlier part of the immigration crisis, within the past 20 years in particular. And it sort of has just not been needed as much. But there were some big cases like 10, 12 years ago about this. And so this whole idea of a church as a kind of sanctuary from, it's in our history, right? It's in our heritage. But I mean, how many times have you thought about that here? Not many. Yeah. All right, so Micah 4. We said, if you go way back to the very first lesson we had on Micah, I told you that Micah, the scholars believe, Micah is an accumulation of multiple authors over time. And the original corpus of Micah is chapters 1 through 3, with some additions here and there, but largely chapters 1, 2, and 3 are probably the original oracle of Micah. And if you think about that, it's pretty depressing. But chapter 4 forward appears to have been written later, and the multiple chapters may not even all have been written by the same author. And we'll talk in a moment about some parallels between one verse in particular that is a direct verbatim pull from Isaiah chapter 2. Well, how did that happen? One of them's got to be quoting the other, or they're both quoting some other common source. Yes?
You used the term oracle for chapters 1 and through 3.
Yeah.
How do you define that oracle?
The vision, the prophecy of Micah,
Okay,
the oracle.
So who would have been somebody who would have been that oracle?
That's Micah.
Who would have been Micah himself?
Yeah, I think most scholars agree that the named author is Micah, who's the author of chapters 1 through 3.
Okay.
So this is very much like the problem we have with Isaiah, which is a much longer book. And most scholars are pretty well agreed that there's at least 3 different iterations in this called, Deutero-Isaiah and Trito-Isaiah in there, because the things that are described in the middle and last of Isaiah clearly happened in different time periods that could not have been, concurrent to this. And here's the problem we get into today when we enter chapter 4 of Micah, because the earlier dating of the first part of Micah is with the Assyrians being the threat, and all of a sudden we get into chapter 4 and it's the Babylonians who are the threat. Well, lots of time separates the Assyrians and the Babylonians. These things did not happen at the same time. Now, some scholars say, well, this is because the ability of a prophet is to see way, way ahead, and he could have foreseen the Babylonians and therefore included them. So, that's a bit of you got to have an agenda to prove, something to really be peddling that, because it doesn't make sense. But hang on to your hat for this one, because next week, when we get to chapter 5, you're going to find and recognize a messianic prophecy as well, and you're going to ask me, well, how did that get in there, right? But we're not getting that far today. I want you to be here next week as well on this. So let's read a little bit of chapter 4, and then it's a short chapter. Let me get it open. I should have had it open already. Chapter 4. And it shall come to pass in the latter days, and side note here, some of your translations are going to say in the last days or in the end days. This is not talking about the end of days, the end of time. It's talking about the culmination of events being described, that toward the end of this experience. The mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and it shall be lifted up above the hills, and people shall flow to it. And many nations shall come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between many peoples, and shall decide disputes for strong nations far away. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more, but they shall sit every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. For all the peoples walk each in the name of its God, but we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. So several things to explain about this before we get into discussing it. The first is the opening verses of chapter 4 are conveying a more hopeful tone than what we've seen in chapters 1 through 3, which is mainly doom and gloom. And this is the return. This is the rebuilding kind of idea. And when it talks about the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, this obviously is metaphorical, not literal. Because those of you who've been to Jerusalem know that the temple does not sit at the highest point in that area. There are mountains higher around it. So this cannot literally be true, but it is sort of a metaphorical way of saying being lifted up, being the higher place that people are drawn to. And that sort of makes sense. In verse 2, when it talks about, and many nations shall come, this is talking about the world. This is not just Jews, but Gentiles. It's many people of all the world shall come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord. And so keep in mind the time in which this is written, in which Judaism, Israel, is an outlier among all the religions and cults of that area, that time, area and era. And there's this vision of all people coming to recognize Jehovah as the one true God. So we talk about how Judaism and Christianity are monotheistic religions. And here's evidence of this as well. So that the seen from their perspective, this is a coalescing around the one true God of Israel. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is at the time this was written, people had no idea of the extent of the world. There was no knowledge of the Americas. There was no knowledge of Latin. I mean, just the vision was of that part of Europe and the Middle East, right? That's all that was known. And so when you talk about nations coming into this, this still has a very regional idea to it as well. Come, let us go up to the mountain, to the house of God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways. And there's some interesting language in the Hebrew here. That he may teach us his ways. The word that's used for teach here, the word that's translated teach, actually means to shoot into, to inject. That he may embed in us his ways, and that we may walk, like live, right, in his righteous paths. For out of Zion shall go the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Then we get into verse 3. He shall judge between many peoples and shall decide disputes for strong nations far away. He who? Who is the judge? Well, according to this, God is the judge. Jehovah is the judge. Well, how can that be? Is this like the Wizard of Oz? Behind a curtain? Again, this is more aspirational than anything and somewhat metaphorical. But then the most famous passage in this section is one you know well. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. I mean, that's just one of the most beautiful passages we find in the Old Testament. What does this mean? Well, some people want you to believe that this means forced uniformity or forced conformity. Because the idea some people have of peace is everyone agreeing with them. We're going to have peace when you do what I want you to do. And this is what went off the rails Friday at the White House, because there is a certain vision of what peace in Ukraine entails. It involves surrendering to Putin and giving the U.S. the mineral rights. And Zelensky, to his credit, didn't take the bait on this. And if you go watch this, I mean, that guy's got composure like I don't think any of us would be that composed to be able to not raise a voice when we're being yelled at like that. And yet, there are people actively spinning this the other way to say he was the aggressor. Right? Remember last week's passage where it talked about those who cry peace, peace when there is no peace. This is the very same idea happening here. And if we think about beating swords into plowshares, this is one of those examples of something that the world is so transformed that you don't need articles of war anymore. So I was thinking about one of my favorite places to visit, and y'all have heard me talk about this before, is Santuario de Chamayo in Chamayo, New Mexico. It is called the Lords of the Southwest. It's a small Catholic cathedral. It's a chapel. It's not a cathedral. No, that's in Santa Fe. This is outside Santa Fe. This is about 45 minutes northwest of Santa Fe. Small town, dirt town. Although the very best New Mexican food in the entire state is right around the corner. And some of y'all have been there with me, right? Rancho de Chamayo is what it's called, if you're in the area. So in this chapel, and there is a holy presence there, I will tell you that, there clearly is. But the priests bring in dirt from the riverbank, and over time, over centuries, pilgrims have made their way there and found healing. And they've ascribed this to the healing power of the dirt. And the priests will tell, we had the youth choir there one time, our Wilshire Youth Choir. And the priest came out to talk to us. And he said to these kids from Wilshire, he said, look, there's no healing power in this dirt. We go get it over there by the river. We bring it and we refill this pit here, and people come take samples home with them, and they consider it holy. But it's not that, it's the place. There's something here where God meets people. It's a thin place. And the priest said, I can't explain it, I don't understand it, but I believe it. But it's not the dirt. But you go into the room where the dirt is, and hanging all around the wall, people have left their crutches and their canes and all sorts of things they used to walk in unwell, and they walked out well. And people like us are like, oh my God, this sounds like Bob Tilton. And yet it doesn't have that, it doesn't smack of that at all. But I thought about that in relation to this. How certain must you feel to lay down your implement of war? It's like leaving your crutches behind because you believe you can walk now. If you're gonna take particularly in this culture, right, where there is no armed, militia with muskets, if you're going to turn your sword into a plow, you've got to have a lot of confidence for some reason that you're safe. And what this passage is really talking about is coming into a time in which peace is so prevalent that everyone feels safe. This is an idyllic description. There's never been a time in human history where this would be true, because there's always an aggressor out there somewhere. So this is very similar to the prophecy of Isaiah that the lion will lay down with the lamb. Is that Isaiah? I think it is. It's painting a picture of an idyllic world we would like to live in, but we do not currently live in. Does that make sense? So the whole notion here that Micah and whoever's writing at this point is trying to portray is we're aspiring to a higher vision than we currently know. Jim?
The song we grew up singing down by the riverside, what's the...
Lay down my burden?
I'm going to lay down my sword and shield.
Yeah.
Down by the riverside.
Which is part of the full armor of God, by the way.
Ain't going to study war no more.
Ain't going to study for war no more.
Yeah.
Right? That comes from this, right? And yet, in the Old Testament, you have all this military language about, and particularly these fundamentalist churches teach their kids to, get on the sword and shield and fight for God, kind of stuff, right? Like you can go to Christian bookstores and buy a little kid-sized sword and shield that it's called the full armor of God, and it's not spiritual, it's literal, right? So anyhow, the Old Testament's full of that too. So this is why this stands in contrast to that, because Micah is calling us to a time in which we feel such peace. And it's hard to even imagine how that would be. The closest thing I can think to this is when someone has been in an abusive situation, an abusive relationship, and they suddenly get free of that and carted away to where they feel safe for the first time in their life. And even then, these people, some of you are these people, right? It is hard to lay down your defenses because you've been fighting for so long. And this vision of, you're not going to turn your sword into a plowshare the first day you think the war is over.
So, today,
Yes.
Christian nationalism, we've got two views with Christianity. We've got the so many who say, including a certain pastor in town, says, no, we're not going to follow the Beatitudes. We do not follow Christ's teachings on these things, because otherwise we can't go out and annihilate, bad leaders that will do us harm. We need to be able to stand up and defend ourselves and go after those who are tyrants.
Yeah,
but then the other side is, so do we not live our Christianity? No, we don't govern with it.
Well, it's even deeper than that, Jim. Jim's talking about, he says there's two views within Christians today about how we should live, and one of those is more militant.
Or govern.
Yeah, to govern, right?
To govern and live, it seems to be two different.
Right, and the person you're referencing does make that juxtaposition. He doesn't want a Sunday school teacher for president, right?
Correct.
Which is why I didn't like Jimmy Carter. But anyhow, the problem is deeper than that. And I'm sorry, I've just lost all patience at this point with people who claim to be Christians and don't believe Jesus. All right, so here's the deal, y'all.
They believe Jesus, they just don't believe in governing.
Well, no, they do not believe what Jesus said. They do not believe the Sermon on the Mount. They do not believe the Sermon on the Plain. They do not believe the Beatitudes. In their heart, they don't. And we've given them too much credit, and I'm tired of that. So y'all think about this. There are some things in life in which there are two things that are equally right decisions. You may like chocolate ice cream, and someone else may like butter brickle ice cream. That's a legitimate choice you get to make. But if you like to hurt people and you don't like to hurt people, those are not equal choices. If you're an abuser and you're not an abuser, those are not equal things. If you are starving children and you're not starving children, these are not equal things. However you get there. So there's a very easy way to think about this. In the American Civil War, there were two sides. And the lost cause myth is that, both sides were justified. No, they weren't. The side that lost was wrong. They were wrong because they were enslaving people. They were wrong because they were abusing people. They were wrong because they were white supremacists, right? And this is repugnant to God, even though they couched everything they did in religion. And here we are today with sort of a resurgence of this thing. And like, it never died, y'all. It just sort of went underground, and it's flaring back. But it has different objects of wrath. And one of those is the transgender community. To be on my hobby horse for a minute. There was a bill introduced in the Texas legislature this week to make it illegal, criminal, for an adult to transition genders.
No.
To make it illegal, to criminalize the very thing. Why? What do we gain by this? It goes to score a political point, and hopefully this bill will never see the light of day, but yet it's there. And its purpose is to scare people into submission. And again, y'all, it's transgender folks today, and it's going to be you eventually. If you're not, it's all these different folks. And again, 2 weeks ago, when I was with the Black church folks in Little Rock, they got a lot of word for us. You know, there's a lot we need to listen to there. And I would take their advice on when to turn swords into plowshares better than I'd take my own, or better than I'd listen to the white church. Micah is describing for us an idyllic world that is not peace by conformity, but it's peace by the kingdom of God permeating everything. Now, one of the problems I have with this chapter of Micah, and it's going to get worse in just a moment when we read the next section. Well, we may not get there. One of the problems I have with Micah is it's very fixated on God being a judge and God causing things to happen. And I understand the mentality and the view of this time in life, and I understand that a lot of Christians today still believe that there is an absolute direction for God's will for your life that God has preordained for you. I'm not among that crowd. Again, I believe free will means free will. And we have the free will that God is not orchestrating things to cause this to happen and cause that to happen and cause this to happen. Because if that were the case, with God being a loving God, so much bad stuff that has happened and is happening would not have happened or be happening. It just defies understanding in that regard. And so when we get to into verse 4, no one shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. For all the peoples walk each in the name of its God, but we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. I mean, I want to believe that if we really follow the God of Israel, the God of the Jews, the God of Christianity, if we really pay attention and learn and seek to emulate that, then everyone would be able to sit under their own vine and under their own fig tree, and no one would be afraid. But that requires a level of community and care for each other that is implied but not stated. Because if everyone's able to sit under their own vine and their own fig tree, and no one's afraid, it means we're helping each other, not hurting each other. I mean, y'all, I'm sorry, this is a utopian vision, and a lot of conservatives today would say, well, that's Marxism. No, it's the Bible. It's the word of the minor prophet Micah. And so we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. Let's move on just real quick. We got a few minutes. Verse 6. In that day, when this happens, declares the Lord, I will assemble the lame and gather those who have been driven away, and those whom, catch this, whom I have afflicted. And the lame I will make the remnant, and those who are cast off a strong nation. And the Lord will reign over them in Mount Zion from this time forth and forevermore. What the prophet is saying here is that God's going to take the very people the prophet believes God has afflicted and make them the remnant that comes back to bring glory to God. How have some problems with this, y'all. First of all, I have a problem with God afflicting people, but this was certainly the idea of the time. I think the New Testament sort of negates this idea. I can get on board with God claiming a remnant and making them whole, making them the leaders, those who survive, right? And I think the way we get at this is the message that the writer of Micah at this point is trying to convey to us, is that when we feel left out and dejected and thrown away, God has the ability to redeem us and bring us together. There is this very word that's used. Oh, it's later in verse 10. We haven't gotten to that yet. Well, let me keep reading. Verse 8. And you, O tower of the flock, speaking to Israel, hill of the daughter of Zion, to you it shall come, the former dominion shall come, kingship for the daughter of Jerusalem. Now, why do you cry aloud? Is there no king in you? Has your counselor perished, that pain seized you like a woman in labor? Writhe and groan, O daughter of Zion, like a woman in labor. This is acknowledging, so this is written probably during the Babylonian captivity. For now you shall go out from the city and dwell in the open country. You shall go to Babylon, there's the word. There you shall be, from your captivity you shall be rescued. There the Lord will redeem you from the hands of your enemies. The Lord will redeem you. And what a beautiful word we find in the Old Testament. We find it in the New Testament as well. To redeem is, most of y'all are old enough to remember S&H green stamps, right? Mm-hmm. What did you do with your green stamps? You redeemed them. It's the same word, right? You took your green stamps, you went to the store, you turned to the green stamps, and you got a mixer. Or, whatever it was you were saving up for with your green stamps from the grocery store, right? When I was in seminary, there was still a green stamp redemption center in Fort Worth, just down the street from the seminary. And I remember getting some cool stuff there with my green stamps, from the store. You redeem them. You turn them into something, right? And in the Old Testament, we have the idea of the kinsman redeemer in Ruth and Naomi and Boaz, the nearest of kin who redeems someone who is adrift. That's the idea. Someone who's without kin. They bring them into their family and redeem them. And this is the idea that those who are lost, God brings into the fold and redeems as well. Oh, Lord, I lost my place here. And I forgot the passage. Well, we'll get to that later. There you should be rescued, and there the Lord will redeem you from the hands of your enemies. What we experienced in chapters 1 through 3 of Micah, again, much more description of doom and gloom. And now in chapter 4, we're moving, and it keeps moving forward this way. We're moving largely into this idea of hope, trying to find hope. But again, scholars think this was written during the time of Babylonian captivity. And if you read verse 10, that certainly is there as well, because it conveys this idea that we're in the pains of childbirth. And this is the very idea that the Apostle Paul picks up later in the New Testament, where he talks about the whole creation is groaning in expectation of the coming of the Lord. The whole creation, not just humanity, but the earth itself, is in these pangs like childbirth, groaning for God's redemption, very same language, of the whole creation. Well, that gives us a little hope, maybe. It calls us to see a bigger perspective than the one we live in right now. And that's certainly very, very hard to do, because the pain of the moment seems to be the only thing we can see, right? And we see our little world and forget that we're part of a bigger plan as well. Okay, I've talked a lot. Let's take the last few minutes. We'll stop right there for a moment. Yes?
I've been pondering something here in light of the fact that I served a few years in the United States Navy a long time ago now. I've been pondering this, beating of plowshares and I've been
Sword,
plowshares for a lot of years and have come up with no satisfactory understanding of it. But when you talk about the peace that we would feel and security there, you know, when I was a kid, we never bothered to lock our houses. And I wondered if there perhaps would not be a slight
Yes.
of a little bit of that, you know.
Yeah, so the point here
I'll
for
do
the
that today.
for the point at home is like when he was a kid growing up, people didn't lock their doors because there was no threat, right? They felt safe. We only lock our doors because we don't feel safe.
Right.
And so this is describing a condition in which people feel so safe that they don't need to have a sword on hand. They can take that metal and make a plow out of it instead. They put it to other use, right? This is not envisioning people who have, you know, an armory of swords. You know, they have one sword, but they don't need it, so they do something else with it, right? Yeah. Before we get any other comment, question from anyone? We want to make sure everyone has a chance.
I'll ask.
Okay.
Redeem my life from the pit and crown me with love and compassion.
The Psalm of David.
Redeeming.
Yes.
So you're saying we redeem like S&H. Well, whenever we take our green stamps in and we get something in return, what are we? We're taking our, I guess, our lives.
So my S&H green stamps metaphor is not perfect, right? I'd use that just to help you understand the word redeem. It's to claim. To redeem is to claim. And the thing about God's redemption, and I think the New Testament is very clear on this, is it does not require us having value. That God redeems us. And even the Psalm of David that you're quoting earlier, you know, he redeems my life from the pit, right? Is not based on worthiness. It's based on God's desire and God's action as creator. That God wants to lift us up and reclaim us. And here's where the health and wealth evangelists get one thing sort of right. God does want the best for you. God does want you to live with clarity and hope and purpose and all these things. It's just not that God wants you to live in a mansion necessarily, unless it's over the hilltop.
So the blender we get is more of the prosperity, the life, the love.
Yeah, so my metaphor fails at that point. It's not that we take something of value to get something of value.
But God gives us, I guess, compassion, mercy, love, and crowns us with love and compassion.
According to the Psalm, yeah.
So I guess it would be our best, our welfare, our.
Well, here's the problem with my metaphor. It's transactional. You give something to get something. And that's not the way God's redemption is. It's not transactional.
What redeem means, isn't it?
No,
Transaction.
not necessarily. Here's where the word fails, and I've confused everything by this. The idea is to give value, to redeem something is to make it of worth, right? To bring it to life, right? And so the green stamps works because you take a paper thing that really has no true value to it, and you turn it into something, you know, but that's transactional. And this is one of the big problems with Christianity, certainly Paige Patterson kind of Christianity. If you listen to his sermons, it's always about doing business with God. It's a transaction, right? I do this for God and God does this for me. And that's not really the way the Bible talks about this, because God does more for us than we can ever be or do or give to God. It's not an equal trade in that regard. This is not a pawn shop, right? All right. Who else has a question or a comment? Drell, you're very quiet.
I know.
Yeah, I don't know how to behave. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how to behave on that.
Well,
Yes.
in reality, you were probably paying for those S&H free stamps.
Oh, of course you are.
all along.
It's just like, you know, I got my cashback card from TXU Energy. Well, yeah, I paid for that too. And
Well, to segue back into your comment about Zelensky, I found an interesting comment.
yes.
During World War II, 4 brothers from the same Jewish family signed up to fight against the Nazis. Only one of the 4 brothers survived. His grandson is the current president of the Ukraine.
So let me say that for the folks on TV. You said during the World War II,
Four brothers
4 brothers
signed up to fight the Nazis. There were two-
signed up to fight the Nazis. Only one of them survived, and his son,
His grandson.
his grandson, is now the president of Ukraine. Okay, fascinating. Thank you. All right, so here's my closing admonition to you this week. Get yourself covered in glitter. Be courageous. Be courageous in what you do. This is a world in which we need people not to shrink back, but to stand up and do what's right and keep saying what you believe to be true. Don't shrink down.
And that applies to family and friends also.
Be you. Yeah. Don't be like Marco Rubio trying to sink into the cushion of the sofa. That's a great photo if you haven't seen it. Yeah, indeed. All right, let's pray together, and Charlene will come with our prayer concerns. God, grant us courage to be brave and strong and stand up for what's right, for your word, your truth, your love for all people. We pray through Jesus Christ. Amen.
We are glad to have